War has changed. No, wait, wrong line. Uh, War. War never changes, and in 2008, Bethesda would revive a dying franchise and sear that line into the brains of every gamer. Where Morrowind redefined their approach to games, and Oblivion expanded on that in scale and ambition, this game would solidify the feel of their titles. From its dense, exploration-heavy map to its open-ended approach to quest progression, this game would be the earliest example of their formula at their best. I'm Redino, and welcome to Fallout 3. In an alternate reality Earth, America discovered a way to miniaturize nuclear reactors and decided to shove them into everything, resulting in a time of plenty while the rest of the world struggled with limited resources. China, noticing America had access to not only nuclear energy, but also possibly the last bits of oil reserves left on the planet in Alaska, politely requested the US for some of its energy. But sharing is communist, and so it's fucking gay, so that wasn't going to happen. China politely requested again, and with a massive invasion force making landfall in Alaska, began the resource wars at. What followed was several years of armed conflict that eventually ended with China being driven out of the US, except the Chinese were sore losers and decided if they couldn't have the pot of honey, no one could. Thankfully, the US had contingency plans in case this ever happened. One such plan was contracting a private corporation to build hundreds of underground walls to house select populations of American citizens to eventually emerge and re-inhabit the country. You are the lone wanderer, an 18-year-old who until recently was living in one such vault where you had spent your entire childhood, going from totally normal kid activities like being bullied and shooting up 3-foot-long radioactively mutated roaches to bullying others and having wet dreams about your best friend. However, all of that went to shit when your father, who had raised you alone since you were a baby, up and left without saying a word to you, which would have been fine if your vault wasn't run by an egomaniacal control freak who decided to base his governance off of North Korea, down to the state you shoot phones that are literally bolted shut on your arm. So for the sins of your father, you, his closest and only family, are to be punished by summary execution. Thankfully, Supreme Leader's daughter happens to be your best friend and decides to help you follow your father into the haven of hedonism that is South Korea, where you can be free to listen to all the K-pop you want and bow down to your new Supreme Leader, Samsung. So, you grab the gun Kim Jong gives you and make a dash for the exit, ducking and weaving between the guards or alternatively, making them more open-minded to your predicament, by showing them the 10mm ways of the capitalists. Yeah, while outside of the main quest you can generally avoid killing people, by sneaking around them, don't expect to talk your way out of every fight. Indeed, speech checks in this game are generally more used to skip past multiple hour-long quest stages than any direct method of avoiding violence. While that might seem a bit counterproductive if your goal is to have people actually play through your game, who am I to question the vision of our Lord and Savior God Harvard? And contrary to what some people might have you think, this has always been a facet of the games to some extent. Believe it or not, coked up raiders and brainwashed indoctrinated policing forces are not too eager to have a chat with you, and given most circumstances will instead prefer to introduce you to the contents of their chambers before introducing themselves to the content of your pockets. Anyway, making your way past the guards and past some minor moral dilemmas that help solidify your karma choices, more on that later, you find yourself in the overseer's office. From there, you unlock a secret underground door, have one last heart-to-heart with your best friend, and finally, step outside into freedom. Damn, global recession hits y'all hard. Welcome to the Capital Wasteland, a near-lawless radioactive hellscape filled with all manner of horrifying ugly-ass monsters. Getting hit with a bunch of nukes only made Washington worse. The entire first act of the game involves you tracking down your father, a task that will take you on a journey across half the map. Your first stop on this journey will be Megaton, a settlement built using old airplane parts, around a still-active nuclear bomb. How do I know it's still active? Because it's leaking radiation. And this isn't minor non-noticeable levels of radiation either. Stand next to it long enough and you fucking die from cancer. What's more is that a cult has formed around worshipping this nuke, a cult whose ultimate goals can best be summarized as setting it off, something that you have the option to do. Depending on your choices, Megaton will be your main player hub for the next 100 or so hours as you go through the game. It has multiple traders, a doctor, and most importantly, one of two mutually exclusive player homes. Mutually exclusive because getting the other one involves setting the nuke off. While you can get either one of the homes for free, their value increases substantially as you invest into them, getting various facilities like an infirmary or a workbench that you can use to craft one of several specialized gimmick weapons. These weapons include a cannon that can shoot out paper bills fast enough to obliterate someone's skull into mushy bits, or a tiny tranquilizer dart gun that turns the most dangerous enemy in the base game into a hobbling joke. Back to the story, you go to one of the local pubs run by an Irishman who has information on your father's whereabouts, but will not divulge that information unless you can pay him. Even if you try to appeal to his humanity, unless and until you are very good with your words, he refuses to give you the information for free and might even increase his fee. So a borderline apathetic, greedy Irishman who happens to own a pub. What did Todd Howard mean by this? Another option is to sneak into the back of his bar and hack into his computer using a mini-game that can best be described as Wordle with extra steps, and on this computer find out where your father was heading off to. However you choose to deal with the situation, you eventually start to make your way to the east, to one Galaxy News radio where your father was allegedly going. However, along the way you will inevitably run into the game's infamous metro tunnel systems. The limited capabilities of the hardware of the time, combined with the fully scheduled NPCs as well as the sheer number of physics objects being stimulated at any one moment, made it difficult to render large areas. While this problem has haunted Bethesda to some extent till date, back in ye old times of 2008, it was such a major hurdle that Metropolitan DC had to be rendered in bite-sized chunks of map. This would normally be all well and good. After all, you work with what you have. Except the problem reared its ugly head when it came to figure out how to connect said chunks of map, and Bethesda decided on the metro system, a series of mostly derelict underground metro tunnels filled to the brim with the average assortment of meth heads, Monday morning college kids, and fucking ribjaws from Benton. While the metro tunnels work on paper, in practice they are a nightmare to navigate. For one, half the time the local map is fucking incomprehensible. Combine that with the fact that some of the metro stations are outright incorrectly labeled, and many tunnels actually open up into other tunnels before you get to go to the surface, and you start to feel like you're going into schizophrenic circles. To be fair, the game tries to alleviate some of these problems by having helpful signs and graffiti scattered throughout the tunnels. However, the effectiveness is immediately fucked because half the time the useful signs can be genuinely hard to distinguish from the assortment of random posters and paint splatters, and half the time you will be too busy staring at your compass because, like a good little MK Ultra victim, that's what the game's conditioned you to do. It's also in these tunnels, on your way to Galaxy News Radio, that you will likely have your first encounter with the Hulk's little cousin, a super mutant. A result of secret pre-war super soldier experiments, these guys can be seen as an upgrade to the basic raiders you'll be fighting up until now. More likely to spawn with heavy weapons like miniguns and rocket launchers, most super mutants will still spawn with hunting rifles and assault rifles, so their outright unhinged spawn rates later on can feel justified. Emerging from the tunnels, you quickly find yourself in the middle of a gunfight between a bunch of super mutants and the Brotherhood of Steel, the goody two-shoes you will be siding with towards the end of the game. This is also probably your first large combat encounter, and while the Brotherhood can be a crutch this time around, it's probably best to get a grasp of the combat right now, before you get caught with it dick in your hand later on down the line. Combat in this game is weird. A combination of Bethesda handling guns for the first time in at least 2 decades, and the nature of the game as an RPG first and an FPS second, results in a mishmash of various shooter styles. Your skills with the weapon not only affect your damage output, like in modern RPGs, but also your bullet spread, recoil, and even the sway on your scoped weapons. Scoped weapons are also the only guns you can aim down sights with. For every other gun, you just sort of zoom in, Halo Infinite style. All of this can make the gunplay feel quite unintuitive, and Bethesda clearly knew this. So, they introduced the Vault-Tec Assisted Targeting System, or VATS. A spiritual successor to classic Fallout's aim shot mechanic that sees you pause time, meticulously pick one or several targets, body part by body part, and execute a rapid volley of attacks with a set amount of chance for each hit. Or you can just spec melee and bloody mess and watch fireworks. And now that you're familiarized with the combat, you help fight through the super mutants, blow up the big one that shows up at the end. Don't bother picking up all the power armor off the Brotherhood corpses, you can't wear them right now anyway, and go talk to Tree Dog, the DJ at Galaxy News Radio. You can do his quest, and I heavily recommend you that you do so. Not necessarily for the quest itself, but because the location it takes you to opens up a bunch of other quests, and some quests lead back to this location, so familiarizing yourself with it early on helps. But if you choose to skip it, a simple speed check gets you the information that your father made his way to Rivet City. Heading south and east along the Potomac River, you eventually come upon Rivet City, which happens to be built out of an old aircraft carrier. Cool idea on paper, but in execution is shipped with over a dozen long identical corridors, isn't maybe the best place for player navigation, as attested to by the fact that you will spend the next 20 minutes trying to find one Dr. Madison Lee, an old acquaintance of your father who you made contact with after leaving GNR. This is the point in the story where you start getting some answers. Lee tells you that she, along with their parents, was working on a project to make a massive water purifier out of the old Jefferson Memorial, in order to solve the Capital Wasteland's clean water shortage, as the vast majority of water in and around the city is heavily irradiated. However, somewhere along the way they hit a hurdle in their research, and coupled with the abrupt death of your mother during childbirth, your dad decided to leave for the sake of your safety, and make it into Vault 101, so yes, you were in fact born outside of the vault. Lee also tells you that your father headed back out to Jefferson Memorial in hopes of finishing Project Purity. Probably because Jude was having a midlife crisis and realized his life so far hadn't amounted to much of anything. Heading there, the Jefferson Memorial is unfortunately crawling with a wag's worth of discount ox, which, after clearing out, you can find a bunch of holotapes your father made, which lead you to one Vault 112 hidden underneath an inconspicuous looking garage in the middle of the wasteland. Getting into the vault, you realize incredibly quickly that it's very different from your own. Instead of people milling about waxing poetic about how great their glorious reader is, all inhabitants seem to be a bunch of robots. If you haven't figured it out yet, the vaults were never really about saving lives following a nuclear exchange, but instead were meant to provide means for Vault-Tec and the elite to perform unsanctioned and often unethical scientific experiments on the unwitting and powerless inhabitants. While Fallout's never fully embraced being a parody, certain aspects of it have always been very overblown for dramatic effect, cartoonishly evil corporations being one of them. Like seriously, some of these Vault experiments are satire level of stupid and unnecessarily cruel. I mean, who in real life would do stuff like this? Oh. Anyways, your Vault experiment was testing how people would live if the Vault store never opened, and they were fed lies about the outside world being an uninhabitable wasteland. So that failed when your father first entered the Vault. Vault 112's experiment, as you will soon find out, involved putting all of its inhabitants in an advanced simulation using specialized pods. In fact, as you'll quickly see, your father happens to be sitting in one of these pods, but not finding any way to wake him up, you climb into one intending to fish him out from within. Inside, you find yourself in a quaint little community called Tranquility Lane, filled with all manner of cheerful people. You also seem to have turned into a child, so it doesn't come off as particularly suspicious when you walk upon a little girl playing in the park. However, things quickly take a turn when the little girl starts asking you to perform rather questionable tasks. And in case you decide committing homicide for a psychotic prepubescent child isn't up your alley, don't attack her or she hits you with a fucking hollow purple. What you can do instead is memorize her whistle, go into this old abandoned house, and use the assorted objects in the right sequence to activate a failsafe computer that summons a bunch of Chinese troops, which fucking kill everybody except for you, the girl, and the dog for some reason. As it turns out, this little girl is actually Dr. Stanles Braun, the overseer and creator of this vault, who, after developing a god complex, had used his admin privileges to abuse and torture the other inhabitants of the simulation. Oh wait, little girl roleplay? An edge power trip? Did Bethesda predict Discord mods? Activating the failsafe actually kills all of the members of the simulation in real life, with the exception of you, Braun, and your dad, who is actually the dog. While you and your dog can leave, Braun is stuck in the simulation, presumably for the rest of eternity. You can also just do whatever evil shit he tells you to do, and he still lets you and your dad go, but the rest of the simulation members will remain stuck, presumably to be continuously tortured by him. The choice of how you finish Tranquility Lane has the potential to be really morally grey. Do you sentence a man, no matter how cruel, to an eternity of solitude and pull the plug on over a dozen lives? Or do you do nothing and let the sick man continue to mentally torture said lives for who knows how long? What if there could be a way to safely extract them in the future? What if there isn't? The uncertainty of the situation combined with its odd nature makes for a real moral dilemma. Or it would have been if the game's karma system hadn't pretty firmly told you what it considered to be the good choice and what it considered to be the wrong choice. And this isn't the only time when something like this happens. In the Oasis, another moral dilemma quest, almost all of your choices save for the comically evil one result in good karma, so the whole system ends up feeling redundant. Rant aside, outside the simulation you are finally reunited with dear dad, marking the transition into Act 2. After a brief heart-to-heart with him, you can head on back to Rivet City with Dad, or tell him you will meet him there later, at which point you can fast travel back to the city, wait for several in-game hours as your father makes his way back here in real time, and then presumably waits to have his conversation with Dr. Lee while you come out of a catatonic stupor. It's been decided that you are to accompany your dad and Dr. Lee with some of the scientists to Project Purity, where work on it can continue. Clearing out any remaining mutants, your father puts you to work doing routine maintenance on the system. Turning off a pump here, booting up the mainframe there, and right as you're starting to wonder what all this busy work is about, shit hits the fan and the pacing picks back up again. The sounds of rotor blades. Vertibirds fly by your view. You run through the only way now open to you, the place swarming with power-armored enemies. But critically, not the Brotherhood. These guys are evil. You can tell because these guys are dressed in black and their leader, Colonel Autumn, caps a random scientist to get your father to activate Project Purity. The Enclave, the last remnants of the US government. Initially stationed on the west coast, they made their way here after the Chosen One sent their original base up in flames. Now, they're hoping to take control of Project Purity in order to marshal the wasteland to their cause, at least according to Autumn. Your father, having no intention of giving over to an isolationist military organization, activates the machine, killing everyone inside, including himself. Stuck between a rock and a hard place, Dr. Lee decides the best course of action is to take the remaining scientists, to an isolationist military organization. Okay, to be fair, the Brotherhood in this game are a lot nicer than they were in previous entries. Hell, even the Enclave are a lot nicer in this game. At least most of them aren't trying to wipe out everyone else who isn't Enclave. Fighting your way through the sewers, you manage to make it to the Citadel, the Brotherhood's primary base, built out of the remnants of the Pentagon, which for some reason wasn't nuked into radioactive obliteration like the White House. The Brotherhood take you all in, and it's promptly decided that the Enclave can't be allowed to keep control of Project Purity. However, in its current state, the project is completely useless to everyone. What it needs is a GEC, or a Garden of Eden creation kit, a device capable of creating life in a wasteland. GECs represented the select vaults, and the closest one nearby is in Vault 87. Getting to Vault 87 is another matter altogether, seeing how its entrance is about as radioactive as Gamer Girl Kushi. An alternative entrance may be found in Lamplight Caverns that the vault was built in. The problem here is that Lamplight Caverns is currently occupied exclusively by a bunch of middle schoolers who, like a certain billionaire-owned Alan, kick out anyone who is 18. Getting into Lamplight either involves a speed check or doing a quest for the settlement's Mayor McCready, where you free a bunch of kids from a... Oh, that Epstein Island joke's a bit too topical, huh? Yeah, so there are slavers in this game, primarily built around Paradise Falls. While you can be a goody two-shoes and just fucking kill them all, you can also be an evil asshat and side with them. Yes, in the year 2277, you too can partake in the flesh trade. Enslaving someone involves hitting them with a mesmatron and then slapping an exploding collar on their neck, at which point you can tell them to make their way to Paradise Falls or become a headshotter. You can even help in the resupplying of Epstein Island and get a moldy cum sock in return. You know, between this and the nuking Megaton thing, this game lets you be a real asshole for no discernible reason. So props to the game for allowing me to roleplay as myself for once. Once you get into Lamplight, a quick trek through the side caverns leads you to Vault 87, which, surprise surprise, is infested with super mutants. It's where all the mutants in the Capital Wasteland originate from, in fact. Making the vault resemble the ending of a slasher fic, even more, you eventually stumble upon a locked up super mutant. Unlike every other mutant you have put a bullet in, this one is intelligent and calls himself Fox. Fox tells you that the GEC is in a room contaminated to the neck with radiation. While you can try to power through using Radex and Radaways, odds are you drop dead, and the wasteland's fucked. Instead, you let Fox out and he grabs the GEC for you. So it's done then. You take the GEC from Fox, bid your farewell, and start to head out of the vault. Now, just to get back to the Brotherhood and...
Objective is secured, sir.
Good work, soldier. Make sure the GEC is secured aboard my vertibird.
Yes, sir. I'll have the techs come down and remove it immediately, sir.
You're certain he's unharmed?
Yes, sir. He'll pass out shortly, but we can revive him.
Excellent. Prepare him for transport immediately.
Right away, sir.
Captured by the Enclave, a timely intervention by the leader, President Eden, potentially saves your life and gives you an opportunity to escape containment. Killing your way through the Enclave soldiers, you eventually run into ChatGPT 9000, who it turns out is actually President Eden. There seems to be a difference in ideologies in the Enclave leadership, with Eden and Autumn both wanting to take the faction in completely different directions. Autumn wants to integrate the Enclave with the larger wasteland and turn it into a savior figure to bolster recruitment, while Eden wants to commit mass genocide, and to that effect gives you a vial of FEV that, when injected into Project Purity, will cause all the water it produces to be poisoned and start killing off the wasteland. You heard that right, the government is putting FEV in the water that makes the fucking frogs dead. Also, you can get Eden to blow himself up with the rest of the base in a bunch of different ways. After helping Eden off his metaphorical roof, one way or the other, you fight your way to the remainder of the Enclave base and eventually make it out to find Fox waiting for you with a brand new toy, and also... Act 3 sees you make your way back to the Citadel. As it turns out, the Enclave have made their last stand under Project Purity, and it's time to take it back. The Brotherhood activates this fuck-off massive robot called Liberty Prime, and there's all these flashy visuals, and everyone is getting hyped up, and... you just follow Prime as he turns the Enclave into piles of Peter Parkers. In case it's not obvious, as the story continues, it becomes more and more on rails with each act, eventually losing any derivations from the set path. Problem that thankfully mostly doesn't affect the side quests, which often continue to have at least 2 or 3 major choices. And can I just take a moment to appreciate the sheer vibe of this entire set piece? Sure, it's not the deepest of experiences, but this bombastic ending to two massive forces colliding with each other feels like a very satisfying capping off point to what is fundamentally a very atmospherically quite an oppressive game. Hell, the atmospheric progression is seen throughout the main story, with you starting out weak and scared and eventually building up to more flashy and Michael Bay moments as you go through it. It gives a very nice sense of progression and power building, unlike a certain other game. Speaking of atmosphere, while it's widely accepted that New Vegas improved on 3's writing and RPG mechanics, and Fallout 4 improved on just about everything else, the one thing that everyone seems to agree that 3 still has in bucket loads is atmosphere. Buckets upon buckets of green and grey and dreary. Walking on the upper decks of Rivet City, just you and 10,000 tons of creaking metal, the cold, oppressively walled and yet weirdly cozy and safe feeling Megaton, the grey masses of DC's collapsed buildings with the imposing visages of emotionless statues looking down at you. Heck, just walking along a broken and destitute road with miles of radiated plains stretching to either side, it all gives a very lonely feeling to the game. So, of course, when gamers who wanted an escape from the miserable realities were instead confronted with more of the same, they threw a hissy fit and complained about it all being the same color and boring and... I joke, of course. We all know that gamers prefer shades of puke green and shit brown to childish colors like blue and red. But, to be fair, in a time where just about every other game was using some or the other primary color filter to hide its graphical shortcomings, it is understandable that people will end up overlooking the fact that Fallout 3 is one of the few games where the limited color palette serves a wider atmospheric purpose, other than making it feel dark and gritty. Anyways, back to Liberty Prime's waltz among tin can corpses, you eventually make your way to Jefferson Memorial, and inside manage to corner Autumn and a pair of his goons. As a final boss, Autumn's kind of shit. Just him and his enclave guards versus you, the Brotherhood's Nepo prodigy Sarah Lawrence, and your companions. It's further trivialized by the fact that you can just talk him out of it. Where does he go from here? Who the fuck knows? He just leaves and is never heard from again. But I won't knock the game too hard for this, because it does fit 3's previously established formula and is still a sensible enough choice to have. What isn't a sensible enough choice to have is what comes immediately after. Due to a fault in the machine, one of you will have to step into the machine to manually punch in the code. The catch being that activating it fills the room with enough radiation to give you every cancer known to science. So either you or Sarah will have to sacrifice their life in order to fulfill your father's dream and... Hey, wait a minute. Sharon, you're a ghoul. You're immune to radiation. Hop on in, buddy, and let's... What do you mean? You're literally immune to radiation. I hold your contract. You've literally been brainwashed to follow. Oh, for fuck's sake, fine. I guess I get to be the hero. I could, said Sarah, but to be honest, the game has sort of been building up to this moment. Your father started this all those years ago and you'll end it. I'm Alpha and Omega, the beginning and the end. I'll give unto him what is the total, the founder of life, really, blah 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 blah. The game started with your birth and ends with your death, sacrificing your life to achieving your father's goal of water for all. It would honestly be pretty good writing if it unfortunately wasn't loomed over by the faces of your radiation-immune companions staring through the window as your corpse drops to the floor. And so ends the tale of the lone wanderer who sacrificed his life to... Wait, why am I getting up? So much like most titles, Fallout 3 had a bunch of DLCs made post-release. In fact, Fallout 3 has the second most number of DLCs, only being beat out by its successor. Going from worst to best, these are... Where most devs would try to end the game's dev cycle with a bang, Bethesda decided to implode in on itself. Last in both release and ranking, Mothership Zeta manages to somehow forget that this is an RPG. Following a mysterious radio signal, you find yourself abducted by little green men and being prepared for a thorough probing. Wrongfully assuming that this isn't something you want, Discount Furiosa manages to break you two out. Eventually, you stumble upon a bunch of cryogenically frozen schmucks. Freeing them, you decide to stick together to try and figure out how you're going to get out. Oh, and you also came across this little girl earlier. Wait, no, not like that. Unfortunately, from here the game takes a turn even worse. Instead of narrative or gameplay choices, you get 2 hours of linear corridor shooting, interdispersed with boring as shit puzzles and set pieces that are interesting for all of 2 minutes. Oh, and you wanna know what's worse than 2 continuous hours of combat in a game with combat this bare bones? 2 hours of combat in this game against enemies overtuned for endgame that eat bullets like gamers eat slop. The one and arguably only good thing about this DLC is the overall aesthetic. It manages to be a nice change from the grim and dirty wasteland, replacing the vast open empty frames and cramped and rusting buildings with the cold, clinical and claustrophobic halls of the mothership. Fighting through the ship, and at one point blowing up Canada, you eventually manage to make it to the command center and promptly promote yourself to captain via dishonorable discharge. On the old captain. All of this just in time for the ship to be attacked by another alien ship, ending with you playing Starfield Alpha version -1.25 as you fight them off. Once the enemy ship is blown up and you say goodbye to your friends and make it back down to Earth, where you finally find the one thing capable of making this dogshit DLC worth playing. And you don't even need the DLC for it, you can have literally disabled it and gotten the blaster without this slogfest. Where Mothership Zeta was a linear combat focus and generally confusing from a design perspective, Operation Anchorage was all of those things, but at least had the decency to be over quickly. Answering an SOS from an outcast splinter group of the Brotherhood, you find yourself being the only person capable of entering a simulation of the Anchorage War, thanks to a biometrically locked state-sanctioned smartphone. Completing the simulation unlocks a vault with all kinds of pre-war goodies, and the outcasts are all about correcting pre-war tech. Hell, it's the reason they split from the Greater Brotherhood, feeling Lions had turned too soft and was too keen on help out random wastelanders instead of hoarding the tech like billionaires hoard wealth. So, they decided to make the Brotherhood great again by fucking off and spending the rest of their miserable existence scavenging for toasters, instead of trying to secure arguably one of the most important pieces of tech in the post-war. But I guess optimal bread warming and cool energy weapons and robot girlfriends are all that matter, even if you end up dying from thirst. This also makes it a bit strange that the outcasts are willing to part with some of the tech in the vault, but then again, I think we have established that they aren't the sharpest tools in the shed. The simulation itself, for all intents and purposes, is a propaganda piece. It's more akin to a dumb action flick than a serious training simulator. From Mission Impossible style spy shit and espionage, to explosions that would make Michael Bay proud. It's very clear that this isn't exactly an authentic retelling of the battle. Gameplay-wise, the entire DLC is essentially 4 separate, nearly completely linear shooting corridors. I like to imagine Bethesda saw New Mutants allowed having a hissy fit over how they turned Fallout into a dumb COD clone, and decided to show the world what Fallout turned into a dumb COD clone would actually look like, before dusting the Dorito dust off their hands and getting back to making RPGs. While initially it seems poised to wallow in the depths of shit with the previous 2 DLCs, Broken Steel manages to ascend to mediocrity almost entirely by virtue of adding a post-game to Fallout 3. Gone is the well-thought-out poetic ending. We need a post-game because Oblivion had it, and Bethesda needed a selling point. Oh, and your radiation-immune companion's now going to Project Purity when ordered. The actual story of the DLC involves you and the Brotherhood hunting down the remnants of the Enclave. During such a mission, Old Liberty Prime becomes one with the Allspark again, and the Brotherhood quickly realizes that the Enclave still have a few tricks up their sleeve. An orbital death cannon allows them to continue to be a threat. So, to deal with them, we first jury-rig together a fancy weapon, which unfortunately necessitates going into a Deathlaw nest. Old Only and Underground is arguably one of Bethesda's best dungeons from an atmospheric standpoint, and is the only other reason this DLC isn't lower on this list. Broken Steel was when Bethesda started employing the age-old RPG tradition of bumping up the difficulty in the DLCs. Along with the aforementioned Deathclaw orgy, the DLC also adds a cavalcade of souped-up enemy varieties to make your life more difficult. At higher levels, you will often have your balls thoroughly evacuated by the likes of albino rat scorpions, super mutant overlords, and the ever-famous feral ghoul reavers. Also guaranteed to be faced in the main DLC story, Enclave Hellfire Troopers, equipped with some of the best weapons and armor in the game. After the super secret Wunderwaffe, an energy weapon that looks like a big gun, is constructed, we are sent via DC's last remaining working metro to Adams Air Force Base, from where we intend to get the Enclave orbital weapon to strike its own control base, putting it to an end for good. You can also blow up the Brotherhood's base, because like I said, Bethesda remembered that they make RPGs. But this was arguably the worst possible way to reintroduce narrative choice. You have been perfectly friendly and cooperative with the Brotherhood right up until this point, so the only kind of evil guy you can roleplay is an evil infiltrator, and not say waltzes and guns blazing and reminding these goody two-shoes that they live in a lawless wasteland. And there sure as shit isn't any moral dilemma, as the only 2 choices are pretty black and white. Thankfully, this is all but rectified in the next DLC on this list. Following a distress signal, you find yourself in defense of a man named Werner, an escaped slave from the terrifying nightmarish hellscape of Pittsburgh, or as it's now called, the Pit, on account of the industrial toxins mixing with the radioactive fallout and mutating every person in the city into some stage of troglodyte. Sneaking in as slave, you find yourself at the lowest most point in the food chain, that is the Pit, well below the raiders that act as the enforcers and well below their leader Asher. Despite being so new and inexperienced, you are sent out on one of the more dangerous tasks in finding steel ingots from the unguarded steel yard, probably because exploring a new location is several orders of magnitude more fun than doing 20-hour shifts processing slag. And the steel yard is also a great showcase of Bethesda's ability to craft an immersive and intimidating atmosphere. The distant silhouettes of smokestacks, the makeshift bridges and rafters snaking above you, the patter of chalk feet, heard but unseen, all come together to make an atmospheric experience that won't be topped until Skyrim, and depending on who you asked, maybe even Far Harbor. Here also, you finally come across some of that exploration-oriented gameplay that the base game is praised for. Scattered around the place are a total of 100 steel ingots. Returning these to the foreman makes him give you weapons, possibly because the toxic radiation has given him early onset dementia, considering you were stripped of your guns at the start of the DLC, specifically so that you can't be a threat to their raider overlords. Just as well though, because you're up to fight in the fighting pits, an homage to the Oblivion Arena, and the only way for a slave to manage to make it to Asher, where the plan is to steal a cure for troglodytification that he has been working on and use it to ransom to take over the pit. Using your newfound toys, the arena goons end up being a pushover, and after all is said and done, you are invited over to meet Asher and also have your knees caved in as you grab back all your gear. Asher, as it turns out, in addition to being a connoisseur of the arts, is also perceptive enough that it's quite tricky to convince him you're not up to something. According to him, he intends to use the steel from the mill to rebuild the wasteland, and that once he has discovered the cure, he will no longer have to use slaves, as everyone will flock here on their own free will. If that all sounds bullshit to you, head right over to the lab in the next room over and find out from Asher's wife that the cure is in fact their baby child. As it turns out, through some massive coincidence, baby Mary has a genetic mutation that makes her immune to the troglodytification, and as such, her mother intends to synthesize a cure from her. It's generally a slow-going process considering she doesn't want to put her baby through potentially life-threatening experiments. You, however, are your own man and don't need no permission for some impromptu kidnapping, so you nick the kid and run for your life. You definitely didn't put her around in a loving mother's skull, did you? Right? Getting the baby to Werner, however, ends up being a bit of an eye-opener. Seeing how this man seems to have no intention of treating a baby this young with any kind of gentleness, combined with the fact that this jury rig setup looks more like a meth cookout than an actual lab, makes you wonder whether giving the baby to him is the best idea. Sure, Asher is completely wrong to enslave people, but his heart seems to be in the right place. Still, some of the worst decisions ever were made with good intentions, and his actions can't exactly be ignored. There's also baby Mary. Doesn't her well-being also matter? How well will these slaves treat her knowing that she is their tyrant's daughter? And can they even find a cure in this setup? All of this results in arguably the only time Fallout 3's DLCs actually present a moral dilemma. If you haven't reenacted the opening of Fallout 4 with Asher's wife, at this point you can take Mary back to him and end the story on his side. Whatever choice you make, your business at the pit concludes as you head back to the capital wasteland for your final adventure in... Welcome to Point Lookout, Maryland, the home of mutated inbred rednecks, bog tribes, and my wrinkly-ass thumb after I spent too much time in the shower. Arriving here on a ferry, with the simple mission of finding out of what happened to a distraught mother's daughter Nadine, you gravitate towards signs of life from a nearby manor like flies to a turd, only to find it housed by one cranky ghoul and his dogs. Before you can finish your introductions, the manor comes under attack by the local tribe of swamp hippies. Helping as Desmond the Ghoul clear out the tribals rewards us with more chores, so off to infiltrate the tribal camp we go. Getting into the tribe proves to be an ordeal in on itself as you navigate a gauntlet of Mirelurks only to be hit with a hallucinogenic at the end and wake up on the other side with a chunk of your brain missing. The good news is that you're now in the tribe's hippie camp and not 10 feet away, you find Nadine. The bad news is she has no intention to return until she can solve the mystery of Point Lookout. Nadine thinks something's up and wants you to figure it out. Sneaking into his cave from an old seat-up, you find out that the leader of the tribe is taking his orders from a holographic brain. The brain tells you that Desmond set up a jamming device that prevents it from sending messages beyond the cave, and would like you to do something about it. This brain, as it turns out, is Desmond's old pre-war nemesis, Professor Calvert, and he would like us to plant his jamming device to completely cut off Calvert's influence over the island. Heading over to the Ferris wheel, you can either side with Desmond and plant the jammer, or you can side with Calvert and trash it. Neither choice is particularly trustworthy, so by default, that makes you a gullible dipshit. You return to the manor just as Desmond opens his mailbox, which presumably had a package from Mr. Kaczynski, because the mansion goes up in flames. And depending on your choices, you either find Desmond here and head off to confront Calvert, or find him later confronting the professor himself. If you side with Desmond, you end Calvert's miserable existence. If not, the brain unsurprisingly betrays you in the most underwhelming fashion possible. The main story now concluded, you head back to the ferry, only to find one final surprise. Nadine, as it turns out, figured out the old Tobar was the one who had lobotomized us, and had in fact been lobotomizing all the hippies in exchange for batches of panga fruit. She locked him up in the boat and decided to now requisition it, so heading back just involves formally informing Tobar of the mutiny, by putting a laser in his skull. And so, as you sail on back to the wasteland, your journey comes to an end. There was a lot more I could have talked about, quests, characters, the trader system, but honestly this video is going on long enough as is. My recommendation? Play the game yourself, and experience all of this on your own. Even in 2025, Fallout 3 holds surprisingly well, and definitely a great entry point into the series. And for those of you who have played it before, considering Fallout 5 ain't coming out until 2035, you might as well get back to it. Despite all its strengths, Fallout 3 suffers from a fundamental problem of feeling rather bare bones. Compared to Bethesda's preceding and succeeding titles, the game has far fewer mechanics. In fact, short of the leveling system, the game lacks any real deep mechanics compared to, say, Oblivion's spell and potion making or Fallout 4's crafting and settlements. As for me, I gave Fallout 3 a crisp 7 bongo bongo bongos out of 10 Grandma's favorite basic songs. Have a good one, and see you next time.